Hey guys, Chicken and Maine, aka Deboo, with a forecast video update. This forecast video update picked up around 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday, September 26, 2022. And okay, guys, we always like to start our video off by letting you know that we are primarily a surf and marine forecaster covering the North Atlantic waters, looking for weather patterns and or systems that produce high seas and or high surf. You can't have high surf without high seas. We have no formal training in meteorology, but we'd like to tell people that we have a BS from the University of Google search. And we're going to start you off today. Lots to talk about with some real-time satellite imagery. And we're going to start over in the Eastern Atlantic. And you'll see that there's 99L invest out here. This has a high chance of development. Does not look like it's going to affect the United States. There's another little area of spin in here, right here in the Eastern Caribbean, and then there's some stuff coming off Africa. Reason why I'm pointing this out is that the models over the last couple of days have been hinting at something else coming out of the MDR probably in the next 8 to 10 days, and this is starting to signal to us when you start to see these types of things like this, because they're basically held up in the MDR, that the models have credence in showing some possible development coming out of the MDR in about 8 to 10 days. Now, we also have what has become Hurricane Ian. Ian is over here in the Western Caribbean Sea. You can see that. The remnants of Earl up in here in the North Atlantic, and an area of low pressure over here off the northeast United States. So this is all rotating in here like this, counterclockwise or semi-counterclockwise. This, like this. And Ian is basically at the tail end of this front right now, okay? The other front is pushing in down into the Gulf right here. And what you see down here in the Bay of Campeche, as Ian lifts up to the north, this gets shoved, or portions of this get shoved in the Eastern Pacific, and you can already see the Eastern Pacific setting up for tropical cyclone development in here probably in the next 5 to 7 days. So we are still in an active tropical cyclone phase. The climatological peak of hurricane season is marked by September 10th, and sometimes the peak of season comes a couple weeks early, sometimes it comes a couple weeks late. Speaking of climatology now, when we get to go in to show you the models about back over here in the MDR, October 20th, right around there, is what's known as the second peak of the hurricane season. So we're coming up to the 1st of October. We've got about another 45 days to worry about hurricane season, because as we get into middle of November, typically the sharp decline in the possibilities of tropical cyclone development, at least in the climatological record. With that said, for those who have never heard this before, as it was in the beginning is how it shall be in the end. Okay, we like to reference that to hurricane season. And why is that? Because at the beginning of the season, we typically see homegrown development in the Gulf of Mexico or off the southeast U.S. coast. And as the months start to progress, you start to get in that, that's May and June. When you get into June and July, you start to look out here towards Puerto Rico for development. Okay, and then as the season progresses in towards late August and September, that's when you're looking for the active AEWs, which is African Easterly Wave or tropical waves. You start to look for them late August, September, coming off Africa, and then, this is what we have. But then as you get past that peak of hurricane season, you start to work your way back towards Puerto Rico again. And then as you're getting the end of October, 1st of November, you're back to homegrown development again. So the season coming full circle. All right, I'm going to switch you over to the latest out of the National Hurricane Center's forecast map for Hurricane Ian. This is the 2 p.m. update. Please visit the National Hurricane Center at www.hurricanes.gov for all official forecast info. If watches or warnings are issued for your area, please heed the advice of your local county emergency officials. Understanding the cone of uncertainty is crucial, especially when you're dealing with a system such as Ian, when the forecast track is uncertain. For those of you that do not know how to read the cone of uncertainty, I'm going to walk you through it. This is the 3-day cone from the National Hurricane Center's website, hurricanes.gov, with the 3-day track and the line on, okay? And so what you're looking at here in the white shaded area, this is the margin of error. And as you see down here at the bottom, the width of the cone is short, but then as you go out in time, the width expands. Okay, this is 3 days, inside 72 hours. And the National Hurricane Center is very good at what they do. And so you can almost be certain that that's what's going to happen. But what the cone of uncertainty means is, and this is where land interaction comes into play. The front, like everyone's talking about, this, that, and the other. But when you have a system that crosses over land, sometimes it can do funny things to it, depending on if the system is slow in moving or fast. Ian seems to be a fast-moving system, at least at the moment. And so when it crosses over Cuba, it will have limited activity or limited association with land as it crosses over. If this was a weaker system, because Ian is a hurricane and a stronger system, a little bump, this is a little speed bump to it. But if it was a tropical depression or a tropical storm, that may do something to the circulation center. So when we look at the cone of uncertainty, let's say, for example, this thing did cross over Cuba, and then the land interaction put a little wobble in the system. That means that if that little wobble got in the system, that system could start tracking to this side of the cone, okay, or to this side of the cone. If it was a big wobble, and you're looking at the center line marks here, which, by the way, H stands for hurricane, M stands for major. If there was an S here, it would be a tropical storm. Anyways, what this means is if we're down here at the bottom where the H is right here, and this thing crosses over and it gets a little loop or a little wobble to it, it can start riding to the left side of the cone, okay? And could end up anywhere at this moment inside 72 hours inside this cone here. So what's to say that it gets a little wobble and then all of a sudden starts to curve? Now you got different effects, okay? But if you take the cone as the circumference of the storm, meaning that the storm is this big, the size of the cone, now you can see that even though that you may not have a direct landfall, folks to the right side of it, especially if it shifts over, will feel the impacts. Okay, and that's why the National Hurricane Center, although the Keys and Southwest Florida are not in the cone, they still got watches there and warnings, right? Or watches, excuse me there. Let me close that up. Hurricane warnings down here and hurricane watches. So that's what the cone of uncertainty is. It's even worse in the 5-day. And so when we look at the 5-day, here's the 3-day right here. You can be somewhat confident that the system is going to stay inside this cone right here. But then look up here. Okay, so going back to the cone, if Ian makes landfall in here and is expected to weaken and the wind field expand, and we're using the cone as circumference, now look who's all affected in here. Now the only difference is up in here. By the time it gets up in here, it's going to be a tropical storm down to a depression, because it's a storm status here by Friday, 8 a.m., and it's a depression by 8 a.m. Saturday. But look, Northeast Florida, Central Florida, you're in that cone, which means that you should have the storm effects inside this cone. Are you with me? Okay, so that's enough about the cone. All right, so let's go take a look at Ian and see what he's got under the hood. Gonna switch you over to some infrared satellite imagery. Now, when I flip this over, I want you to take and apply what we just talked about the size of the storm being inside the cone of uncertainty. Okay, you ready? You with me? Look at the size of that. Look at your cone. Size of that. Look at your cone. All right, switch you to this afternoon's visible. And again, you can see the front line in here. This is all diving down in here. And then we are about probably 6 to 12 hours out from our pinned tweet. Okay? Now, if you've been following us on our Twitter social feed, some of you, I don't share I post everything to Twitter, and I cross-post over to Instagram and automatically share over to Facebook. I do not post everything that I post on Twitter to Instagram so I don't blow up my feed. But if you are following us on Twitter, you know I was kind of focusing in. I had picked out some satellite imagery up in here in the Central Gulf. And, a lot of people that have followed me for a long time knew what I was indicating. And then about 48 hours later, that's when we started to see the GFS start to shift out here towards the panhandle. Okay, and then the cone of uncertainty made it out here to the line here. And so everybody kind of thought I was crazy for kind of picking this spot out when all the models were going into Central Florida. But then the GFS came on board, and again, that's when we started seeing that shift out here towards the west. And then I saw a post by Eric Webb today that says that on Ian, out of all the models, the GFS has been or has had the better record on the system. And so what that does is that tells me that what I was seeing in the imagery, the GFS was seeing. Now, ultimately, the GFS came back, and then everything has now shifted back to the east where we are. My point being is that, if there's still a cone of uncertainty in here. Let's go back in here. There's still a cone of uncertainty in here. It could still make landfall in here at this particular moment. There's still plenty of time for the models to change and switch back. I think we're inside 60 or 72 hours before it's supposed to get here. Well, we ain't crossed the tip of Cuba yet, and we don't know what land interaction, if any, will occur here. Okay? So that's why it's important to not focus on the exact track. All right, we're going to switch you over to some motion now. We'll put this into motion for you. And this is real-time visible. A couple things I want you to take note. We're going to talk about where it's going to cross right here. Look at this flow that's coming off the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, the setup that we like to call this is engulfment. And when something engulfs, it just blows up. Boom, right? Okay, so we've got this hurricane that's spinning like this, and then now we're starting to get northerly flow off the tip of the Yucatan. When Ivan lifts up north of Cuba, that wind in here now switches out of the west, and now it's drawing wind over the surface of the central Gulf of Mexico. And coincidentally, as that does that, this is where we go from hurricane to major hurricane, right? And so here's the setup coming up for the tip of Cuba. I want to switch you over to my files. Now, this is the images that I used in the current pinned tweet on our Twitter profile. And as you can see here, the storm was located here in the Eastern Caribbean Sea, although the convection was well out in front. And that's why when you're looking at infrared satellite imagery, just because you see a blob of convection doesn't mean that's where the system is. The surface circulation was back in here. And as you can see, I drew an arrow coming up in here and then making the turn into here. And I gave actually four arrows in here, just pointing this area out because this is part of the overall envelope. But these three main arrows here, I've got it going up in here to this side of Florida, because I know on past experience that climatology tells you that climo is either up for this time of the year, is either up or up and to the right. You with me? Up or up and to the right. And so that always plays true, at least for me. And so when we look here a little closer, you can see South Florida in the center of your screen at the very top right there, and you can see northern Cuba. Now I had two choices. I could either go to the left or I could go to the right. And I chose the right there because it made me feel that, you know, I had that eastern trend in the early run. And so that looks to verify. That's on our current pin tweet. And if you look in the comment section of that current pin tweet, you'll see that we commented that there's two arrows here. The one on the left is favored, even though I put the one on the right, because there's always a wild card. So looking at those two arrows, think of that as the cone of uncertainty, if you will. And you know, I have to have a margin of error in there. And then the other image that I used in the pin tweet is here. And again, I'm on this side, a little slot right here in the middle, and then over here, because this satellite, this was a leftover of a trough in here, and these are areas of spin. And so those are the things that I'm looking for when I'm looking at the imagery. And so when I saw this, I said, that looks interesting. And so, you know, this gives me the idea, looking at spin in the atmosphere way ahead of the storm, of where the storm might be going. And it was after I posted this image, and I think it was a wagon wheel image that I had posted, that's when the GFS started coming back this way. And so keep in mind the comment about Eric Webb and the GFS over the other models being a little bit more accurate than the other models. This also tells me that I was on the right idea. Now again, guess what? This line in here is still in the cone of uncertainty. Are you with me? Now, I'm not suggesting that it can make it back over here, but there's certainly 4 to 5 days still out of what may or may not happen. It may make a right-hand turn and go into Florida. The European model, which, by the way, we always like to say, sometimes, like in history, weather repeats itself. And that's how you get the phrase repetitive pattern or repetitive in nature. That's how that's coined. And coincidentally, just last year, 2021, we had Elsa on the same path and same trajectory, or pretty close to the same trajectory. And so when we look at Elsa's track, you'll see came in here to the Eastern Caribbean Sea, went over Jamaica, but still went over the tip of Cuba, up the coastline, and then off and out to the right, up and to the right. Now, Elsa was a weak system. It had blown up, but then it had fallen apart in here. And there was a southern leg that was on the underside of Elsa that I was telling everyone, wait till that southern leg lifts and clears up in here, and then also where Elsa can get back over open ocean, and then that's when we went into the hurricane. Up landfall, up into the Big Bend area. The benefit of the storm going up in here was it's less populated than what it is in here for Tampa. And so today's afternoon run of the Euro, although it's one model run, but everybody likes the Euro because it's been one of the most accurate models consistently over the years. So everybody wants to lean towards the Euro. So I'll put it in motion for you. Now this is 48 hours. That's 72 hours, making a semi-landfall maybe right there on Tampa, and then back up into the Big Bend, up into Georgia, and then it starts to fade apart, and then off and to the right. It's one run, it's one model. The GFS, if I'm not mistaken, has a landfall on Tampa at 12Z. And again, it's one run. We'll look at that in just a minute. I wanted to also point out to you, again, over here in the MDR, okay, there's that system that has a high chance of development. You'll see it just dissipates over 3 days. But look, the MDR starts to open up again. You see those features at the bottom of your screen? And so this is at the 8, 9, 10 day mark. And you see a feature moving into the Eastern Caribbean Sea. And so this is 10 days. And we've got that secondary bump in October that we talked about. So the MDR is not done yet, especially when the GFS, the ICON, and the CMC today are showing possible tropical cyclone development in the MDR. We'll show you that. Here comes the GFS. This is the 12Z run. We'll advance the model for you. And you can see that there's a major hurricane that's going to be in the eastern Gulf here in about 48 hours. GFS is dropping it down to a 949 millibar major hurricane right there at landfall in Tampa. It is one run of one model. It's very possible that 18Z, the overnight run, they do a shift back towards the west. It's a wait and see game at the moment unless you can actually see it set up in the imagery of where it's going. I'll advance the model some more for you, and notice here that it does the same thing that the Euro does. There's a slight little hook to the left. You see that? And again, folks, this is just one run, but we'll keep advancing it for you, and you can see that it lifts out like the Euro out towards the Northeast Atlantic, and then it's done. All right, I'm going to show it to you in the Windy model, and or the Windy app, and this is kind of where it gets a little scary for folks. I don't do this to scare anybody. It involves life, limb, and property. I do it to try to keep you aware so that you can help yourself make the proper decision for you and your family. This is the 12Z GFS. This is going into tomorrow night now. This is Tuesday, going into tomorrow night. You see it crosses over Cuba. And then this is going into Wednesday. Not a lot of time left for preparations. Let me pull this down in here. We'll zoom in a little bit more. Actually, let me keep this open where we're at here, because now we need to talk about something else. All right, so you've probably seen me talk about the East Coast effects, right? And there is a strong northeast fetch that is forecast to develop from the Outer Banks down in here, aimed in here at Jacksonville, which, by the way, that's where I'm based out of, is Jacksonville. And so this strong northeast fetch is going to be pushing water down in here towards Jacksonville and into the St. Johns River, okay? And so this southerly flow and this flow right in here is compounding the issue for northeast Florida. And what's going to happen is, or what could happen, with all the heavy rain and the street runoff, it's got to run to the lowest spot, so everything's going to try and run to the river. At times of high tide, and it'll probably be 3 to 4 cycles, at times of high tide, that water's going to move in the St. Johns. The St. Johns River flows from the south to the north, and so the natural flow of the water trying to get out the river mouth is being stopped by this northeast fetch in here. Okay, so that's going to start to back a lot of water up in this river here. And when you compound the issue of heavy rains, folks that are in low-lying areas and in creeks, you're going to see that your water levels rise. Now, this is a form of storm surge. It's not the storm surge that you're thinking about associated with this system, Ian. But this is a form of storm surge. All right, let me advance the model some more for you. This is going into midnight Wednesday. It's going to be a long night if this run of the model verified. You folks in Tampa, Southwest Florida, in here, prepare yourselves. Don't waste time. Get off the computer. Set your alerts on your phone at an hour. Set your alarm for an hour or two, and that way you take that time to go get the latest update on what's happening. You take 5 to 10 minutes, and you get back to doing whatever you need to do to prepare yourself. Now, this is Wednesday. Again, it's just one run of the GFS. Take you into Thursday, and look. This is setting up for somewhat of a little bit of a stall. If you go back and look at the 5-day cone, you'll notice that even increment here between hurricane and major, even increment here between major and major, even increment here between major and major, and then you'll see how the dots clump up to each other. This is an indication that the system is going to slow down. And so you're going to be under, if this run of the model verified, please keep in mind what we talked about, the cone of uncertainty. If this run of the model verified, you're going to be under 24 hours or more under some terrible conditions, folks. Take it into late Friday. I probably should have backed that up. Now the system moves off towards the north and things begin to settle down. Let me back this up just one and then let me adjust it, because we'll go back to what we're talking about on that northeast fetch. And I think we were here late Friday. Nope. I have to back it up to Thursday. 1 second, guys. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. Look at this extreme. This is an extreme northeast fetch, guys. This is winds. Let me just double check that I'm making sure that I'm at the surface here. Give me 1 second. Okay, so northeast winds, 25 to 30 knots in here from the Outer Banks, pushing down in here at northeast Florida, like we talked about here with the St. Johns River and the possible flooding that may be coming with it. Now, all right, so I've drugged this video out as far as time-wise is concerned to get us to the 5 p.m. update. This is just out of the National Hurricane Center. This is the 5 p.m. update. The 5 p.m. update now shows a landfalling hurricane into the west central Florida coast just north of Tampa, and a major hurricane just prior to landfall. Now, the slowdown in speed in the 5 o'clock discussion talks about the prolonged, because of the slowdown, the prolonged effect of storm surge, heavy flooding, heavy rains, and strong winds in here. This is the 3-day forecast track map. And if you remember, when we talked about in the very beginning of the video, when we talked about the cone, if you take the circumference of the storm and put it within the cone, you can see who's most likely going to be affected. Now, at this particular moment, if this were to verify, it really doesn't matter if over the next 48 hours or so, you get a little jog to the left or you get a little jog to the right. There's going to be a lot of people impacted on this type of track. That's all I have for you for now. Stay tuned to our social feeds for real-time updates. Thanks for following.